Is there any doubt that they feel 100% alive, Dennis?
Yeah, yeah. Not like me. I really need to learn to be more like them myself. Yeah.
Do
Sorry.
you do you see the same kind of exuberance and joie de vivre in the Antifa protesters in Portland?
Yeah, it's a different sort, though. Yeah.
How would you classify their emotions?
Um. Yeah. That's a hard one. Yeah. No, they are a little bound up. I guess they're white people just struggling to find this black ideal. You know, they want to be grappling on the streets with these women, but they can't. So they're trying to get there.
Sad.
Yeah,
Sad.
that's unfortunate.
What's going on in Portland these
In
days?
Portland?
Yeah.
Well, Antifa's got a new shtick. They've been attacking a gentrified neighborhood, the Pearl District here. And then the other night, they showed up handing out balloons and washing windows that they were breaking the week before, carrying signs saying Antifa loves you. Yeah, so they're trying to charm offensive. I don't know if anybody's buying into it, but it was pretty weird. Yeah.
How many Portlanders feel like their city's being destroyed? I mean, they keep re-electing leftists, so I guess this is what they signed up for.
Yeah, and they don't vote any different. There are neighborhood associations and business owners complain here and there, and they'll get a little bit of attention in the local media, but nothing changes. It's just full steam ahead with abolishing the police. They're rolling back laws, like a law that made for mandatory minimum sentences. They're rolling that back, even though it seemed to decrease crime. It's full steam ahead with all the lefty projects, despite the fact that regular Portlanders I don't think are really on board with it. Yes.
And the business community?
Small business owners will complain, and they'll get a write-up in the press, story here or there. It'll get smothered by, all the on social media and elsewhere. It'll get smothered by all the lefties who control the narrative, with an iron fist, pretty much, and nothing happens. Yeah. There's some, like in the black neighborhoods, the gunplay is out of control. So like these black pastors and others will come forward and say, oh, we need to stop this. We need to get the cops back on the street. And they get hammered in the press. They're sellouts and everything else. And people will try and dox them or expose, their past. If they can find anything on some guy. Yeah. So people are applying the brakes, but nothing's happening.
Wow. But it seems like the intense Antifa rioting has backed off a little bit the last week or so.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's been weak. Like I said, they did that weird charm thing, but they're still trying. They have rifts aplenty, though. I mean, there's a huge rift between the BLM with black people and the white Antifa. They're not on the same page. And they're often their fights break out like on Twitter in the open. So the movement's kind of untenable, but they keep trying. My impression following them on social media is that the white anarchists are desperately trying to keep this thing going. And they still show up, in the dozens most of the time, not big crowds, but they'll show up at the ICE facility or to somewhere else, some gentrified neighborhood, break some windows, cause a little ruckus, and then go away. I don't think it matters because they're getting politically what they want,
So how much Black Lives Matter is there in Portland? How active and influential is that organization?
Well, there's a couple of small groups, Don't Shoot PDX and others, and they're making a little headway. They'll file lawsuits. They file lawsuits that for one instance, the cops can't use tear gas to control riots. They get a federal judge to impose a sanction for that. And attack various methods they use for rioting, like so-called kettling. Well, they corral a bunch of people. They'll basically chase people down the street and corral them and then arrest everybody. Or last time they forced everybody to stand for a picture or be arrested. And they're trying to get them to outlaw that. Just whatever practice the cops use, they'll get a federal judge often to ban it. They can't get this done with the federal cops who guard the courthouse. But yeah, so they're pretty effective considering there's only 6% of the population, and they probably don't have the support of regular Black Portlanders. It's just a very small group that drives things here.
Is Black Lives Matter in Portland as gay and transgendered up as elsewhere?
No, they're kind of. Yeah, they put forward their trans folk often, but there's a lot of thugs. When the things were hot and heavy through the summer, and there were great big crowds showing up, a lot of Black thugs showed up to try and cash in on the grift. I'm gonna go in there and take advantage of the soft whiteys who are running around. But yeah, it's always here. Everything's got to be trans up front. It's like the joke about the Republican National Committee. If you find the one Black guy, he's the keynote speaker. Like here, you get the Black trans woman. That's your keynote speaker, and they're all competing for that job.
I'm looking behind you, Dennis, and I'm not seeing a great deal of hoarding. So you've able to let go of needless possessions.
I'm letting go of possessions, like my ratty old couch. I'm moving at the end of the month, so yeah, I've thrown a bunch of stuff out.
What was the experience like of going through your possessions, discarding, or did you put some of them on eBay, Amazon? Did you turn entrepreneurial, yard sale?
No, yeah, I don't even have the energy for that. I gave stuff away. I put stuff out by the dumpster and let people take it. It was pathetic because I was just thinking what a paltry collection of material goods I have. But yeah.
Yeah, I've just started selling stuff on Amazon. So
really,
yeah, it's I've got too many books, and so I've been reading a lot of books over the past year. The books that I couldn't buy as ebooks, and so I've been selling them on Amazon. Let's welcome Dooovid into the show. Dooovid, if you want to unmute. Dooovid, how's your eBay business coming along?
It slowed down. I still got behind me. You could see these CDs. I have about 600 items listed. I made I'm making less than $1,000 a month now, but I'm still making some supplementary income. So happy about that. I have a whole bunch of books that just aren't worth much. Unfortunately, books really just aren't worth anything. CDs still have a little bit of residual value. If you want to talk about that, might be interesting because Dennis probably knows a bunch of these names. So ironically, Frank Zappa, I got I had like 30 Frank Zappa CDs to sell, and they sold for an average of like $15 each. So I made like a good chunk, a good few $100s, as opposed to the rest of the stuff that really like $2-3 each. And the reason why Frank Zappa's CDs were so valuable is basically supply and demand. The mainstream labels, there's millions and millions of these, so there's so many in circulation, as where Frank Zappa decided to create his own label and take out his own music. So actually a lot of these are relatively rare, and I could still get like $15-20 for a CD. Books are they're heavier, and but I'm going to move into books and other things. I mean, like eBay is a good way to make supplemental income, and you could basically as much effort as you want to put into it. Like you have to procure something to sell, which is like a little bit of difficulty. And then I'm pretty good at selling it. I mean, if you care, I'll go into it. Like I get bubble wrap. I order like hundreds of these like bubble wrap things perfectly for CDs, and they make little mailers for CDs, like cardboard that like fold out so it's guarded. But I buy these little like 5x7 inserts of cardboard that cost like 10 cents each. So I fold them over. If you want, you could even do a screen share of my eBay to just, I have 100% sellers rating, thank God. And if you look at, I'll put in the chat, just to, say thank God, like Luke Ford, we might argue later if Dennis is interested even today about kind of like being honored by the Goyim. And I said, like, what does it mean, honor from the Goyim? But I'm saying, okay, to run a business and be successful. So you can see perfect rating, very fast, well-secured packaging, top quality, greatest hits of Bob Seger in the silver bullet band. Fast shipping, thank you. One size fits all by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Fast shipping, thank you. Zappa and the New York and by Frank Zappa. Awesome eBay, very fast shipping, hybrid, highly recommend. God Shuffled His Feet by the Crash Test Dummies. Thank you, love the music. Dark Night by of the Soul by Philip Wesley, and on and on. So, say if that's honor from the Goyim, like they haven't made me a dinner for being an awesome eBay seller. But yeah, thank God I got 100% rating, and I'm making supplementary income, and it feels good to, so to say, run a relatively honest business where I'm giving people what they want at a fair price. eBay takes like a huge cut. I was looking at my numbers. Like shipping and handling, but like eBay ends up taking like 25% of what I make after because they take that 12% even out of shipping and handling, and I'm selling low priced items. So, by the time I pay all my eBay fees, eBay makes almost as much as I do.
And Dennis, how big is your merchant gene?
Very, very, like I always said, I'm the goyest of the goyim. Yeah, I'm listening to Dooovid and I realized I gave away stacks of CDs. Took them to the Goodwill. I should have tried to sell them. What about vinyl, Dooovid? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I might be moving into vinyl, and they're actually much more valuable. So ironically, because vinyl, because it's supply and demand. So, they started remaking vinyl for music because a lot of people think that the best quality or easiest to the ear quality still comes from vinyl as opposed to CDs. So they started remaking them, and also just because of supply and demand. So it's not, like a stuff isn't worth something based on how good it is. It's based on supply and demand. So something can be really, really good, and if there's just a ton of them. So vinyl relatively is in enough demand that they're more valuable. In fact, like some Beatles, Rolling Stones originals could be worth thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Now, it's not like comic books, but it's somewhat like comic books that, like, if you have records in your basement, it's possible that some of them are worth tens or even hundreds of dollars, but most of them are worthless.
Dennis, how does one keep friends that you live stream with? Because I've done terribly on this score. Like I really started out live streaming with you and with Casey back in 2015, 2016. I used to, on a typical live stream, I'd have like 6-7 people. It's been impossible to keep going, and it's not just me. It seems like a general problem that when you stream with people online, you start arguing with people online, and people start falling out online. And if you take a friend from real life and you start live streaming with them, the odds, approaching 90% that you're going to start falling out with them, because what makes a compelling live stream are intense arguments. How does one maintain friends and live stream and argue with them? Any thoughts, Dennis?
I don't think you do. I think you have to have separate separate areas here. You can't live stream with your friends. It's like, you can't truly be friends with a woman because romance will always intercede, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I seem to have alienated everybody that I knew via live streams.
Well, we all
somehow.
have. I fell out with Dooovid. I essentially didn't talk to you, Dennis, for 3 years. I've had relatively little contact with Kevin Michael Grace. I've invited him on the show half a dozen times over the past few months, but he doesn't want to come on. Casey doesn't want to come on my show. Like Vivian doesn't come on my show. Like almost nobody who I used to stream with comes on my show. But it's not just me. This is like JF Garapi has simply gotten tired of streaming with other people, so he simply does solo shows, even though they're probably 1/20th as interesting as his large panel shows. It seems to be a dynamic perhaps built into online argumentation, the perils of the e-personality. Any additional thoughts, Dennis?
It's stressful. I came back here, and the reason I haven't been on is because I'm different, I think, in my way. I get butthurt easily, and I'll go off. I do this in my own life, and I don't know why. A year or two later, I realized, why am I not speaking to this person, you know? But like I did the first show, I came back and visited you about a week ago on Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Out of the blue. It was very stressful because I'm sitting here and I know you're trying to make an interesting show and you're questioning me, and it wasn't, and it was, you know, it was a morning and I was kind of, I wasn't really up, and I'm thinking, I was feeling great stress thinking, yeah, I can see Luke struggling and I suck right now. And it's just, that can easily translate into resentment, you know? If you think you're not doing well, you know, you want to blame other people maybe, or just say, screw this. It's very stressful, you know, and you being in the driver's seat or in a different spot maybe than us, we come forward and it's like, you know, we have to come in and please you in a sense, you know.
Dooovid, any thoughts on the perils of the e-personality and why people have such a hard time live streaming together for very long?
Well, I mean, it's funny because you're in Hollywood, or even Dennis, a little background in music, and live streaming is probably just a fraction of what real fame is like in real life. And also we've been talking a lot about money, and like if this is interesting to Dennis, I thought yesterday we talked about, or even to talk about more, is kind of this like, is it better to judge a person's expertise and worth by the size of their bank account? And does Judaism endorse that? And like the honor that you receive from the goyim, so like a Hollywood actor that you might be famous, that would obviously cause them to turn against their friends, and cause dispute among their family and all these things, probably a lot more so than live streaming. But from a Judaic approach, like, covered from the goyim, I'm being honored by the goyim, you're a Hollywood movie star, that means nothing, I'm completely unimpressed. But you say, okay, I will measure the worth by a dollar amount. So until you made this amount of money, it's like money actually has a substantial worth. So the fact that you're famous, even if you are actually famous, say that's completely meaningless. But the money is actually meaningful in relation to this conversation. That yes, money or fame, even just small e-celebrity like Dooovid and Brundle and like Babs and Week in Review, is enough to cause strife among people. Let alone if someone came into like, $100,000. If you're not among rich people and someone gets a court case and like wins like $20,000, that's enough to cause strife between people. Like when I was delivering papers and I got like a $5 tip on my brother's route, that caused strife. My brother like threatened to beat me up unless I gave him like a good percentage of the tip, because it was his delivery route, and I just happened to get a really big tip that day, and he's like, that's mine. So like I assume, Luke, you're just saying that for entertainment value, but obviously in Hollywood this is probably just a small level of what you've seen.
Yeah. Dennis, anything there that you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, money. The problem with money is, we hate it, but putting a dollar value on things has to be respected. I don't know about winning, if you win the lottery, that's one thing. That can kind of show us the difference between the money itself and this other thing about somebody gets rich doing something. It's not just the money that it's a material thing, but it's also, that's a point system. And so the world is valuing that person, with, the money is like, it's unavoidable that the money should, I hate saying it, raise your status, I mean, it's a lot, I could sit here and say, yeah, but I know more than that rich guy. And, I could do that better than that guy who's successfully doing it, but I'm not,
Dennis,
it's different than fame, but it's similar. There's a similar aspect, because like fame is visceral. You could feel it. Like God forbid, me and Luke were talking about the Orthodox attitude towards prostitutes, but say, okay, you could convert money into a prostitute, but you can't necessarily convert money into beautiful women desiring you. But you can convert fame into beautiful women desiring you. But there's similar elements.
Well, fame is the only, that's different. Yeah. I mean, because it's one thing to have a ton of money and have women flock to you because you have the money, and it's an entirely other thing if women desire you for your physical qualities or whatever. you know?
Or your fame. I mean, say if you're famous, you could be ugly and famous, and women
Yeah.
probably desire you also. Maybe not to that level. Then you say, okay, they're desiring the fame, not the person.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I didn't mean to get too vague. I don't know if this is what Luke wanted to talk about.
No, there are no limits. There's nothing that I want to talk about. So this is just open, wide open. Dennis, you've also done quite a bit of solo streaming. So initially I thought, oh, solo streaming, this is great. You know, I don't have to please get along with anyone else. But solo streaming is really, really hard, and nobody watches. Dennis, what's your experience with solo streaming?
Yeah, I mean, I do it. I'll do it again. It's like masturbation in front of everybody. Yeah,
exactly.
I can't help it. Yeah, no, it's the worst. And it's, I should learn to be, I mean, what you do, bringing people on is better, and it's better for you than just a solo stream, which is more indulgent, because, bringing people on, you have to deal with people. You have to submit somewhat to other people. And solo streaming is so indulgent, like, I'll just do it and I won't worry about what the other guy's saying, and I'll direct everything myself, and I'll be in complete charge. And the viewers will vanish though.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Said this many,
Dooovid.
I mean, the science, maybe Luke finds this interesting. I've encouraged Jennifer to try to monologue in streamers. And I've seen this, like, if you could monologue, you have better potential of being a streaming. And streaming requires a full package of being able to talk to people, having guests, covering events, and monologuing. But if you can't monologue, like Jennifer is basically dependent on a guest or me, because she has a hard time speaking directly to her listeners. And so at that point, you say, like, I have a relationship with, my 1,700 subs, or Luke, he's been blogging for decades, and I'm sure there's many different people that he has a relationship. Or if you're famous or a politician, you speak directly to the people. Anybody who's curious about me, I'm talking directly to you, versus when you're talking to a person in front of people that you're having, like a public conversation. And to some extent, the streaming is theatrics, but you can't really be an e-personality unless you're capable of monologuing and talking directly to the people who listen to you. So it's like Brundle, gets Richard Spencer, and then he has thousands of subs, but then he has his monologue where he's talking straight to the people listening to him, and they got to figure out, do I like this guy? Do I want to keep on listening to him? And what is that value proposition or relationship with the people who are actually listening to us? And how have you developed and nurtured that? And then how do you make sense of and it's kind of like running a synagogue or being a party promoter. It's not much different than how you'd go about it in in real life. If you have a synagogue, you have your regular congregants, and you have your regular time that you give a sermon, and then every few weeks you have to bring in a scholar in residence, a guest lecturer. And so streaming is really just a microcosm of the entertainment news business and in a change in technology. I mean, that's why I recommend people to take Luke Ford seriously. That's why I told Jennifer we can review most people, like Charles Moskowitz, Luke Ford, Kevin Michael Grace are more media professionals. I mean, it's hard to be like a media professional in that way. That is, like, obviously if they were like Dennis Prager, Luke Ford wouldn't have time to talk to Dooovid. But these guys are media professionals, as where Dooovid is just kind of like a introverted, geeky intellectual that's good with computers and capable of getting my voice out there largely as something I would not be able to do IRL, and it's only possible to me largely due to technology. And I don't know enough about Dennis. I thought might have had some sort of professional media or entertainment background, but I'm not sure if I'm mistaken on that.
None at all. No. I was listening to what you'd say. I think in radio, don't they teach the radio personality to think of himself as speaking to one person out there and not think, right?
Yes, I just bought a course, How to Be a Better Radio Presenter. I just spent $100 buying this course, and they keep talking. The most important word to use is you. You're speaking to one person. So you talk as in, you might be thinking, you might have done it, you might have said this, you might have experienced that, but they keep drilling into you. You're talking to one person.
Yeah. It's, I guess, more intimate in that each individual person out there feels that you're talking directly to them. Yeah.
Yeah, but wait, that's difference when you're a newscaster. The people, they're not there for you. They're there for the news. They're there for the sports. To the streaming, or like if you're a famous person who has your own social media where you talk directly to your fans, that once you become a personality, like no, you don't just talk to one person. You have to talk to your followers per se. And I mentioned to Luke Ford the other week, then I promoted Jewish music and other music. You have to have a fan club. You have to be nice to your fans. You can't grow like and saying like Yossi Pimenta is a pretty famous name, blessed memory. He was a Talmud scholar, finished Shas many times. He probably even played in L.A. Many times, but he was a nice guy. Like he would go to a rundown synagogue just to encourage a bunch of loser Jews who are learning to play the guitar, and he did that all the time. And it wasn't even that difficult. If you got a hold of him, it's like, Yossi, can you help out these kids who want to like learn how to play Jewish music? If he had time, he probably would have done that. And in Hollywood, there's probably all different types. But yeah, I mean, you want to nurture your own audience where it's like, Dennis, I got hundreds of people that tune in for me, and I've spoken to them, and I meet them occasionally, and I know why they watch me. I know the value proposition that I'm offering them. I mean, I don't know if, Luke, you feel like that.
You must be generous.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Keep going.
I'm just going to say, I was just going to add to what he said. You have to be generous. I know that's where I am not. I haven't been, I'm very selfish, but you have to be generous, whether you're on this tiny platform of ours or a radio personality, people need to feel that.
Sorry, Dennis. What's your experience with monologue? I find that so hard, like coming up with original material and then not reading it, but just speaking directly to the camera from the heart. Do you have any all-time greatest hits? I mean, what's the longest you've been able to just look at the camera and just speak? What's your experience, Dennis?
I could do it early on. Maybe I just used up all my shtick, but I could do it early on. But I can't prepare. It's just like by chance. Occasionally, I could get in the groove, and I could probably keep people entertained for a good hour or two, just rambling on a subject. But most of the time, I'm just reaching, and I wish I was like Kevin, where he just does a really professional show, and he probably sits down the night before and he takes notes, and he's got an idea of what he's going to say, and he could go and fill an hour or two.
And it's that presence that Kevin has. I mean, it's I'll admit it's intimidating. I mean, he has such a presence. He's has such a strong personality. I've been researching radio, and apparently there are two types of personalities. There are people who take the temperature of the room, and that's 95% of people in radio. They just kind of sense the temperature in the room. And then there are the rare personality like a Kevin. He's the thermostat. He sets the temperature in the room. So it is quite rare that I can set the temperature in the room. I can read the temperature in the room, but Kevin has that unique skill. He sets the temperature in the room. I don't know. Do you have any
downside?
Go ahead.
There's a downside. Say if you're a people pleaser versus, say a party pooper. So he sets the thermostat, but if you don't like it, you're going to leave. Yeah. And the reason Luke Ford doesn't set the thermostat because he's a people pleaser, and like he doesn't want the girl to leave him. So she starts saying like, "Oh, I'm going to leave you." Luke is like, "What do I got to do to change?" As opposed to Kevin, he's like, "Let me purposely set the degrees a few degrees higher to encourage you to leave."
Dennis, any thoughts on this dichotomy between those who set the temperature in the room and those who read the room?
Yeah. I guess I should learn how to read the room. Yeah, I don't. I mean, and I can't do what Kevin does, and that's why I probably will never be any good at this. But you have to know the room too. And you have to understand what people come to you for. Also, but it does kind of remind me of something that an artist said when he was being criticized about something. He said, "We'll tell the audience what they want." Somebody was talking about, your audience is, doesn't want this or that. He says, no, we'll show them what they want, and they'll know once they receive it. If I could master that, if you can master that, you'll be a success at whatever you do. But of course, you have to have something. You can't just do what I try to do, just come out here and just try and pull something out your ass. You got to either prepare.
Sorry, I maybe 5% of the time I can I can set the temperature in the room. I mean, it takes so much energy. It's above and beyond my normal predisposition. Occasionally, I feel like I can set the temperature in the room, that I can be the thermostat. 95% of the time, I can't. I can just simply read the room. What's your experience with setting the temperature in the room, Dennis, with being the thermostat that everyone else responds to?
No, I can't do it. Like I said, I'm just no good at it. I come in and I'll go on a rant and I think what I'm saying because it's coming from me. And I think, well, we all think we're right about everything, or we don't think it in the first place. And then I throw it out there and it's like hitting a stone wall, it just bounces off. I don't know. I'm just going to try and learn to be more gracious and generous in my life generally.
I have a good memory for music, but I'm not particularly musically talented. I mean, like if you asked me if you were in a synagogue and wanted to remember like a certain tune, I actually have a very good memory for that. But and I could train a little bit, but I'm not, I'm not a great singer. But I promoted Jewish music. I know Jewish music, and it happened many times where like I was the singer. Saying if it was like Luke Ford gets married. I mean, Luke Ford's probably a pretty popular guy, but if you're like, oh, some convert gets married and, there's no money and someone's got to show up to the wedding and they can't afford like a singer, and this is like Doovid's the best they could find. Or, certain Jewish events, like, like if we had an event and like, I'm not really a good prayer service leader. But if it came to it, like, the Luke Ford fan club gets together and we're like, who's going to lead prayers? It's very possible that people would turn to me. And I remember, I went to the Hare Krishna temple pretty often. I mean, in fact, I usually, besides now COVID-19, and I played their instruments. And I went to this Hindu temple because they wanted, they had this called Ratha Yatha festival at a local Hindu temple, and they wanted the Hare Krishna devotees to come and provide the music. And I was the only one that showed, and I'm not even like officially a Hare Krishna. And the guy like looked at me, he recognized me. It's like, oh, the Hare Krishnas are here, like to perform. I mean, it was religious, but I did it. Like I played the mridanga and chanted for it. It's the only time in my life I ever did that. I led Hindu chanting because like I felt kind of obligated. And in that sense, like, yeah, music is the best way to change the temperature of the room. Maybe like entertainment, comedy, or something like that. In like if you're just in Hollywood, like reporting or acting, you don't get to change the temperature. Like you have to, and you have to have an extremely strong personality. And I remember the first few times I sang, I was like, oh man, I'm messing this song up. I'm butchering it. And I was like, actually, this African American woman who was the ex-wife of this guy coach for in chess was the first person who's encouraged. Like, no one knows that you messed it up. Like my mind, I would like sing like a few words of Hebrew. I was like I know that I'm not, like I'm only half Jew and my Hebrew's off. And I would just like give up. I was like, oh man, I messed it up. But she was like, no one knows that you messed it up. Just keep on going. But so there is that certain feel, and maybe it's probably like that in pornography. Like I've seen the clubs where you have to shift the temperature to where people are ready to start having sex. And if you're in the club scene in LA or Manhattan, maybe even where you're at, it's usually done through the music, and actually sometimes it's done through the temperature. That they'll actually put, like a lot of those clubs, they actually do set the temperature very hot to to get people sweaty and take their clothes off. And if like club music, like they'll start playing like some orgy type music. Even at the synagogue when we have our dance parties, they start playing this like orgy stuff, and then people start like taking their clothes off. It's and I don't know if I'm sure both of you have seen that many times, and it may not be that someone naturally, like there's some magician science. And it's funny that I read books from magicians, and one of the training things like to be a magician is actually to train yourself to feel temperature. That you say if it's 68 degrees or 70 degrees or 72 degrees, your average person doesn't cognitively notice the difference, but behavioral wise. So like if your goal is to induce girls to want to have sex, God forbid, that it could be factually setting the temperature higher actually vastly increases the chance that a person's going to think like that. And then if a person has trained themselves to be aware of these certain signals that your average person never would have thought of.
And super chat, $20. Thank you so much from Josh Randall. I think if successful streamers and podcasters like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss can help, but wonder if success is about rolling your sleeves up. Both of them were annoying when they started. Dennis, what are the qualities of the compelling, successful live streamer or radio personality? Anything that comes to mind?
Like I said before, generosity, knowing your audience, developing intimacy with them, like they think you know them and you're speaking directly to them. Raising the temperature, like David was talking about, you raise the temperature and get people to loosen up. I don't know how to do it because I'm a failure at it, but I mean, I think you used to do pretty great. Your show was pretty amazing for a while there when you just attracted people. Remember?
Yeah, we had a good run in 2018.
During the Bronco years.
Yeah,
streaming is probably like entertainment and maybe business in general. Like, you know, if you're in Hollywood and you're trying to get famous, you have to build yourself up personality. You have to master these techniques. You have to go to clubs. You have to do every small acting gig that you get. And then, you know, you get signed by the big leagues. And then you could tell F you to everybody that wasn't nice to you and just hook up the people that, you know, that were nice to you. And so there's probably a certain element like music that, you know, your average band that's struggling, that you know, most I lost money in music, definitely. Like music promoting was 100% of losing money venture, you know, relative, because like after you sell the tickets and you pay the bands and the party and everything, usually you're running a deficit, especially if you're like in Brooklyn, New York, doing small time concerts. Even you get 50, a few hundred people, it's almost impossible. You have to really reach the big leagues to actually get paid. And then there's that difference. You know, like you would like Luke, you know, like, oh, he's finally get signed by the big leagues. And then he would have the opportunity to change his demeanor. And I think actually most people are not nice. You know, experience in the business is that the people that are actually nice are rare. But you're saying to build yourself up from the ground, you being nice, it's a benefit, and it's hard to be popular without being nice. But once you kind of like sell your soul to the corporations and the big leagues, I would say almost none of those people are actually nice. And I mean, I've read Luke's books, and that's what I got out of Luke's books, that these people aren't really nice. I mean, they have their own bad karma and things that they're dealing with. And it's like winning the lottery. You know, if you're trying to make a business and you're like, please buy my CDs, please buy my stuff, you know, spend $10 on my Frank Zappa CD. And, you know, then, but you know, once I'm a millionaire and I have my FU money, I'd be like, by the way, I never really liked you. I was just pretending to be nice until I got ahead. And that's why you find, like, with money and fame, there's a big tendency that the only friends the person has after they become really famous are the handful of people that really believed in them when there wasn't much reason for them to believe in him. You know, saying like, I remember when I had absolutely nothing and no one was willing to lend me $100, but you did. And now that I won the lottery, you're my only friend. Or like, you know, like, God forbid, like, I remember the time where I was in prison or the hospital, and all the time people that I thought were my friends, none of them showed up. None of them cared. And that's why, like, 30 years later, even though I'm one of the most famous people in the world, that person's my only friend.
Dennis, was there anything there you wanted to respond to?
Now, yeah, I was thinking about, some guy made a whole movie, and it turned out about that. Dude was talking about how, you know, you're going to get to the top and then you're going to say, screw everybody who didn't support me. That's probably the wrong approach, though. You know, there was a guy who made a film, and it ended up being like his only feature film, and it was all about his negative experience with Hollywood, and he even featured an actor who was supposed to be Brad Pitt. You know, and it was like trashing on all these known actors that he didn't like. And the film ends with him getting an Academy Award and then telling everybody to fuck off. And of course, that particular director just disappeared. I was thinking, and I know my own personality, but petty side of me, it definitely leaning that way. And that's probably why I'm not a success in more things, is that I.
Well, can I make it one step further before you put in, Luke, that it even gets to the point where it's like, you know, like in Hollywood, it's, you know, it's like they joked about George Clooney, like, unless you're a beautiful 6-foot blonde, check yourself at the door, you're not getting in. Or unless you're the one guy who lent George Clooney $100 when he was a nobody, that guy might get in. And when you have that, like when you say, okay, I reached the fame and now I'm getting those things that I always wanted. And honestly, I don't want to cut anybody in on it. Maybe nobody, or maybe there's a handful of people that you want to cut in on it. And they say, well, what are you cutting people in on? And it's usually, like immoral sexual relationships. And you can't really cut people in on immoral sexual relationships, or you can. And that's probably why Hollywood, and, that's why Luke Ford is an expert in what he was an expert in.
Dennis, what does a person do when he disagrees with virtually 100% of his audience? So I am doing a lot of live streams where I am disagreeing with everybody in the chat. For example, with regard to COVID, I have not had strong opinions about how government should react to COVID. So it does seem to me, from what I know, that there were some overreactions by government, that the shutdowns by and large seem to me, in retrospect, to have been bad policy. Certainly restrictions on outdoor activity was insane, but I could not get on a high horse about it because I just didn't feel I knew enough about COVID. I read a book on the 1918 Spanish flu. It seemed really bad. Something like 500,000 Americans died from the Spanish flu in 1918, and many of them were young. Not like with COVID, the old people. Yeah. So my audience is overwhelmingly of the perspective that government reactions to COVID have been sinister, that Bill Gates is sinister, that the vaccine is sinister, that lockdowns come from an evil place, whereas I just understand politicians as making mistakes, trying to wrestle with an unprecedented crisis for a century. And so I was unable to come on here and say, you're being screwed over. Like, people want to hear that they're being victimized, that they're being stolen from, that they're being screwed over. My perspective is that virtually nobody thinks that they're deliberately doing evil. People do the best they can from their own perspective. So any thoughts on the perils of the live streamer who is consistently going up against the opinions of virtually 100% of his audience?
No, I'm with you on all of that. I mean, I think there's this COVID hoax, but there's a very real health crisis, obviously, behind it. And the problem is, what's the temptation for you? The temptation for you, Luke, is just to go full in with the guys who are saying it's a full-blown conspiracy, right? That's what people, that's raising the temperature, and that's kind of flattering them. And people don't come here to have their opinions refuted, right? They come here to have them reaffirmed.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. No. Dooovid doesn't want to do that. In fact, and maybe that top 5% of genuinely good, not just live streamers, anybody doing anything like that, is the guy who's able to not just flatter them and go along, the guy who's able to contradict them, but still keep them coming back and get them thinking, maybe that's the trick.
How much of an instinctual contrarian are you? So on a 1 to 10, I think I'd place myself as probably an 8. I think I was once described as someone who sees the outside world as the enemy to be debunked. How about you, Dennis?
Yeah, I was going to say like 7. Yeah, it's just a natural inclination to me. It's one sort of non-Gentile feature is that I have this tendency to always want to critique and especially when I see everybody going one way, I don't want to follow along, even though I feel the pull. Something in me, sometimes I'm outright repulsed by, the herd going one way or the other. Of course, that's something you have to check too, I mean, trying to achieve this objective mind, at least when you're saying things like COVID, you know what I mean? I try to compartmentalize and say, I'm going to consider the question like a fucking alien, that's descended on Earth and has no skin in the game. And you're just viewing this thing. It's very hard because of the pull of that herd. And for me, as often as not, it's the pull of the contrarianism, wanting to go against it.
And Dooovid, how much of a contrarian are you on a 1 to 10?
I'm probably pretty up there, like 9. And I've studied so many esoteric things where I actually believe these things, like these questions that I've analyzed and read so many books on, like what if the material world doesn't even exist? And these type things. And I could, because the complicated systems of a lot of things I've studied, like I studied physics and Kabbalah and mysticism, Hinduism, and most of these conceptions are non-material. So I could, I struggle in my mind to conceptualize these things to the point where I could be working with my mind with one of these systems and largely be, saying what I mean. And even like, Talmud, like me and Luke are practical people living in modern America. But if I'm saying like, no, honestly, I want to live exactly according to the way the Talmud says, even though the Talmud says some of the most ridiculous things in the world. And, there's a lot of things like that where, if you have a rationalist approach, but like, no, man, I could say with a straight face, any quote in the Talmud, no matter how ridiculous it says, or even like Yeshiva is saying, like me and Luke probably are able to stream largely because it's an Orthodox Jewish approach. This is what Jews do. God forbid, like the 0 to 100 verbal aggression. I was in Mir Yeshiva, and there were thousands of people, and that's what we did. We yelled at the top of our lungs these arguments about Torah, and in theory, that's a good thing. That's how you figure out how to become a better person. But because Judaism is kind of like a dual morality system, you don't want to let the goyim know our tricks. So like if we're in our inside circle, like that we're dealing to the larger public, it's difficult to you kind of turn that in. And it's also based, like if me and Luke were meeting in a synagogue to do this, it would probably begin or end with prayers, and that would change the whole setting. So like me and Luke would be agreeing or disagreeing, and saying like we might disagree with each other so much that we wanted to kill each other, God forbid. However, after that, there would be be time for Mincha and Mariv, and someone would be like Baruch Hu, or Yiskadal, Yiskadash, and me and Luke would both say Amen, and that would probably like reset us till we could do it again the next day. And maybe Luke and Dennis, you don't have that commonality of Orthodox Judaism where it doesn't matter the argument we get in. We're probably both going to want to daven Mariv afterwards.
Well, you have the benefit of being a small community among the Gentiles, so no matter how much you fight within, you're going to have to leave temple and go into the Gentile world. So you're going to hang together more than out here. Us deracinated Gentile white Americans, supposedly the whole world is our domain. And so, there's no sense of in-group for us anymore that prevents that. I mean, our conflicts become set and divide us.
But because if you're Jews in the Jewish house of study and we're a minority, our conflict is in some extent training for the regular world. So like, how come Jews have such, high verbal IQ? If it's not, you could say it's genetic, but it's part of our culture because like, synagogues have speeches and lectures and kind of like cerebral, and we're always arguing about things. But as a minority culture, the big reason why we're always arguing about things is because we could test it, because then we're going to go outside and interact with the larger Gentile world, and based on how well we succeed or fail, we could come back into the Jewish house of study and kind of like, take a scientific approach to Judaism. But you as a Gentile, as part of the majority, you can't really take that, let's debate what's the best way to go about, living in society. And if that doesn't work, we'll come back tomorrow and try something else.
It's gladiator school for you guys. Whereas
I'm saying we're not, you could look at it negatively like that and say,
I don't mean
anti-Semitism. But I'm saying just like I'm a minority, the personality I put on for the larger majority is largely an act, as where the personality that I act around my fellow Jews is more indicative of who I really am. And, like Jews in Hollywood, but because I'm largely acting as the minority among the majority, we could go back to synagogue and train for our acting skills and test it day after day. As opposed to you as the majority, you have an expected way that you're supposed to act as the majority, and if you don't act that way, everyone's going to. But like, if the Orthodox Jewish kid one day comes out and he's he's BLM, and then the next day he's alt-right, and then the next day he's this and that. Like, it's like, well, whatever. He he was from the minority anyway, so he's just testing out, God forbid, all the ways that he could fail trying to fit into the majority.
Yeah. I'm curious as to ask.
At least make some money off of it. So that's why I mentioned Luke. You said like, no matter what, they're never going to accept you. I don't believe it. the honor that you think you have, even if you're a famous star in Hollywood, is fake. I don't believe that they're ever going to accept you. But I do believe in money. So like that, like you tell them, oh, you went out and they liked you, or you went out and they didn't like you, but so I went out and I made some money.
Hey, Dennis.
I was going to ask both of you guys, how comfortable are you with not knowing the answer, right? I mean, because we need certainty, and that's why people get carried away, say, with their idea of what's going on with COVID or this or that. How comfortable are you navigating the world saying, I don't really know at the end of the day? Like it was Pascal or somebody who said, what do I know? And his idea was that I don't know anything for certain as I navigate things. I mean, I feel like that's the way I go through the world, and it's not really helpful. It would help me to just assume certainty, whether or not I feel it or not.
Well, I'll answer that first. For me, it's rarely important. I think I would live pretty much the same life, even if I was an atheist. I like the traditional Orthodox Jewish way of life, so I don't find that certainty is important to me. But how about for you, Dooovid?
Yeah, I mean, even my dad had accused me that a few times, that psychoanalyzing why he became Orthodox. But yeah, personality, I prefer ritualistic to small talk. That like when you go to synagogue, I don't want everyone to come over and be like, how are you? What's you doing? How's the weather? It's easier that everyone comes in, and then one guy says the mantra and everyone else responds, and then kind of like, okay, you're part of it. You didn't have to. It's it's not like an anti-socialism. It's just a different method of social interaction that I actually prefer. And you could say it's communal. Might not have anything to do with God. It's saying like, if you like Dennis, you're a Gentile, you're white, but where could you, like all these people in Luke Ford argument, where could you go to just like be a member? And it's like, well, really nowhere. I mean, you might have some structural advantage in larger society, but as a Jew, we could go to synagogue, and don't necessarily have to like prove myself. That like all you have to do is follow what everyone else is doing, and it's basically ritualistic. So even if it's prayer, it's about God, and theoretically, and it's like the New Testament, the Pharisees who are making it look like we're praying in the synagogues, but the critique is at least somewhat explanatory. That yeah, it's social. It's like me and Luke, no matter how much we hate each other, no matter how much we did to each other, when we go to synagogue and we see each other, we may or may not want to talk to each other, but the prayer leader is going to say something, and we're both going to straight face forward and say amen. And if Luke Ford gets an aliyah, no matter how much I dislike him, I'm going to say amen to his blessing. And I mean, there might be some people that are like, oh, I'm not going to say amen to Luke Ford's Bible. But like, I mean, generally, say like, no, I mean, if he gets called up and honored in the synagogue, and so this formalized structure that's not necessarily based on the same social niceties, even though in theory it's all based on like God in these spiritual ideas, just in practice, no, it's just a social system that in some ways, depending on the personality, is much more easy to navigate than the haphazard social systems of the unstructured American West, or the countries that don't no longer have a traditional structure.
Yeah.
Okay, Dennis, there are a lot of non-Jews though who are racinated. They are rooted. They are based. They are connected. Yeah. What's your experience with non-Jews who have intense identity and intense community, and in a functional way, not a dysfunctional way?
I don't know any personally. I meet them online and stuff, and we don't seem to be able to come together because there's something about us right now that we are sort of antisocial. All of us trying to forge, all this last 10 years, right? It's been this clumsy attempt for people to form something like a white identity. And it obviously, we can say now it's a failure. Because what we need really is a religion. I mean, what Dooovid said about ritual, I realize, it's always been a pet peeve of mine. Some of the importance of ritual, especially religious ritual, is that it has no real application in the material world. So, you go through all these things. I like believing in God and the creation, whatever creation myth your religion has. It gives you an anchor that you can believe in it, and whether it's wrong doesn't matter, because you're not going to go out in, believing in Genesis isn't going to hamper you in the real world in any way. But if you believe in critical race theory, well, then you go out in the real world, and that applies to everything you do. It could get you killed if you believed it, if that makes any sense.
Dennis, how much have you been listening to talk radio in the last 5 years?
Not at all. I haven't listened in forever. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it seems like the formula for success in talk radio is to get people riled up and essentially communicate to them that they are a victim, but you're on their side and you're going to fight for them. So my experience with listening to nationally syndicated conservative talk radio is that I would invariably leave the experience angrier than when I began listening. What's your experience to the extent that you have listened to talk radio?
Well, I listened to Rush Limbaugh way back in the day, and he was almost a counterculture figure. If you remember way back, it was like late 80s, early 90s when he first came out. I don't know. You don't go away angrier, even though the whole process has been, like you said, it mollifies you somehow, and it's a negative thing. I mean, look at the career of Rush Limbaugh. What did he achieve? He basically kept a bunch of people, a bunch of us, fixated on all these really peripheral things at the end of the day, or the symptoms of the disease, and nobody came out of there daring to do anything about it. Really, talking about tax cuts and nonsense. But yeah, I didn't. I mean, I never got that much into it either, though. I mean, Prager's different, right?
He still depends upon riling his listeners up. In my understanding, estimation, let me read to you a little bit from an essay published in 2008 by Dan Shelley, the former news director, assistant program director at Milwaukee's WTM Radio. He wrote this for Milwaukee Magazine. Talk show hosts are popular and powerful because they appeal to a segment of the population that feels disenfranchised, even victimized by the media. These people believe the media are predominantly staffed by and consistently reflect the views of social liberals. This view is by now so long held and deeply rooted, it has evolved into part of virtually every conservative's DNA. To succeed, a talk show host must perpetuate the notion that his listeners are victims, and the host is the vehicle by which they can become empowered. The host frames virtually every issue in us versus them terms. There has to be a bad guy against whom the host will emphatically defend those loyal listeners. Any reaction to that, Dennis?
Well, it's all true. And like I said, it's not a good thing. I mean, it's like pornography of a sort, right?
Yeah.
Nothing comes of it. And we saw what Rush Limbaugh died, rest in peace. But like I said, at the end of the day, what did he achieve? Nothing. He's like a shock absorber for the system. It's really all he is.
Yeah, Luke, I developed
Go ahead.
my understanding to this because I listened to Rush Limbaugh in high school for like a year, and then I remember I bought his book. I forget which one that basically had his analysis of some of the major issues like abortion, crime, taxes, and then after that, it wasn't really intellectually stimulating anymore. That I basically understood his arguments, and it was repetitive. And maybe I'm high IQ. I need constant intellectual stimulation. And so Rush Limbaugh is basically valuable as like the freshman class. And so once you've developed, most people never go to college or can't even graduate. So the freshman class is going to be the most popular. But once you've gone on, there's really nothing to listen to anymore. And I was looking, I couldn't find the search. Maybe Luke sounds familiar to him. I have to look for the Talmud. But I think it's even a Mishnah or some Talmudic statement. It talks about the types of rabbis and popularity. It says the most popular rabbis are the ones that tell stories. And then it goes through like the ones who know common applications to law, to the more complicated things. And the conclusion of the Talmud is basically, the least complicated the rabbis is the most popular. The most popular rabbis are the type that tell stories, as opposed to the rabbis that can answer the most difficult pressing questions are usually the least popular rabbis. And Luke has even the science. You could have it maybe aimed towards IQ or the type thing. So in a religious circle, it's more be like about telling stories than technical stuff, or be like me and We Can Review Church of Entropy, where we want to go more into like math and science that most people don't care about or understand. That from the media side of the business, it's guaranteed to be that way, and it's like an inverse pyramid where the more important the content, the smaller the audience.
And Half Galatian says in the chat, Luke, your riling people up critique seems fatuous. Any topical format, any op-ed in some way riles you up. You are falling for the framing of liberal critics of talk radio. Okay, so Half Galatian, here's my response. Does talk radio rile people up? Does talk radio depend upon reinforcing a sense of victimhood? Does talk radio consistently cherry-pick facts and present the world today and current events in a way that is primarily designed to enrage people? I think it's clear that it does. Talk radio is about... Let me finish, David. Talk radio is about framing things, cherry-picking things, distorting things, and enforcing to people that they are victims, that they are being screwed over, and I'm going to fight for you against the enemy. Talk radio, syndicated, particularly right-wing talk radio, because I don't listen to left-wing talk radio, depends upon telling you, this is the victim, I'm going to fight for you, you're being screwed over, you're being taken advantage of. And no, it's not inherent to an op-ed show or to an op-ed. Many op-eds calm you down. Many op-eds give you, oh, I was really mad about this, but now that I understand it better, I'm not so angry. So no, I don't think it's inherent that you have to make people angry. If you enrage, you engage. Yes, that is a very successful formula, but it's absolutely toxic. Talk radio enrages people. It reinforces a sense of victimhood. It is toxic. It is also entertaining, and it also does some wonderful things. It gives a sense of community. But there is a level of toxicity to talk radio, syndicated right-wing talk radio, that varies. Not every host has the same level of toxicity. Rush Limbaugh did not, generally speaking, leave his audience much more angry than before they tuned in. But most of right-wing talk radio reinforces a sense of victimhood. It distorts people's understanding of reality. Instead of being even-handed and communicating to people that other groups, say on the left, they experience the world differently, Jonathan Haidt type of understanding, where you understand moral foundations and why some people view different hot button issues differently, you can present ideas in a way that brings a sense of calm, or you can distort ideas in a way that communicates to people that you're being screwed over, you're being victimized, you're being stuffed, and I'm going to fight for you, and here's the enemy, and I'm going to fight against this enemy. Dennis Dale, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, you're right. And what you realize what they're doing is they're holding out for you the prospect that things are eventually going to get better. It's like a fucking morphine drip. You go get your fix, and yeah, you get riled up, and maybe you go away feeling a little bit angry or not. But there's this expectation. People listen to Rush Limbaugh for decades, maybe, with the expectation that, yeah, here's a guy fighting for me. He's calling it out, and it's only a matter of time before the world is straightened out because we've got it figured out, and there's more and more of us. And of course, as you see, things just got worse and worse. The sort of things that riled up Rush Limbaugh, for instance, just got worse and worse over that period of time. And it goes to what Dooovid was saying about repetition. That's the point. Like, he was all this freshman class over and over again, right? But that was kind of the point of it. It's like, what did they say about drug addicts? They keep chasing the first high. And that's kind of how they kept people going, I think.
Dooovid.
Yeah, I mean, because I'll be the amateur scholar here, because I've actually studied the Greeks, and what Luke is talking about was already clearly defined by Aristotle and the pathos, ethos, logos, and Cicero wrote about these things. And it's not politically correct to talk about this, seeing Nazi propaganda, and even probably the way Hollywood and media and entertainment still does it today, but it's just not taught in the universities, or at least admitted to be taught in the university anymore because it's politically incorrect. But as Aristotle and basically everybody till today has laid out in a way like Luke said it, but not a pejorative way, that's how you talk to the masses. That's how people are. And if you want to talk to the masses, that's how you talk. If you're talking to a subset of expertise, then you might use a different method. But the masses, that's in essence the reality of the masses. So trying to talk to the masses like they're experts is of no benefit to the masses. And I mean, Luke is saying it because Luke's a talented, talented e-personality. And I'm sure Luke is familiar. We've discussed a lot of this stuff, like regarding Nazi propaganda and all of these things. But say if the human psychology is the fact that this is how people respond, and when you have big groups, these things of you want to go with pathos and ethos and a tiny bit of logos. And when you have a group of experts, it could be almost all logos with no pathos and ethos. And the great rhetoricians throughout history, basically designed a system for a separation for how you talk to the masses and using the techniques that Luke mentioned, and then how you control, the elites, how you control the institutions among the people who are capable of larger understanding. So Rush Limbaugh is kind of like the freshman class. So if you graduate the freshman class, you move on. And if you flunk the freshman class, you stay in it. So from a conservative point of view, the only people who listen to Rush Limbaugh are the people who can't get out of the freshman class. And to say that's the masses, because most people aren't cut out for advanced degrees and are never going to get past the freshman class.
Dennis, anything you want to comment on?
Just that objectivity is anathema to the mob, to the mass, and that's the problem. They don't want to hear that, oh, maybe it's not good guys, bad guys, or they don't want to hear that these Antifa freaks that are wrecking the town right now, they're just people like you, and they're just people like you with emotions that are being manipulated, and they're redeemable. Nobody wants to hear that. The worse things get, the less they want to hear it. And that's one reason why they want stories. Stories every story is a moral, and every story, if it's any good, ties things up at the end. They don't want to hear facts. Facts are deadening. To just go out there and objectively try and tell what is. To know a thing is kind of to kill it off, and it kills off the mystery of it and everything else.
Right. It's like arrows. It's once you get to know someone, it dramatically reduces your ability to sexually objectify them. So I got to know a lot of porn stars when I was writing on the porn industry. Their erotic power over me was considerably diminished when, I learned they had, Crohn's disease. They had this incurable disease. They had, this sick brother. They had, these weaknesses. They were struggling with this eating disorder or whatever. It just significantly, writing on the porn industry destroyed the erotic power of porn over me during that time. It's only when I stopped writing on the porn industry that I could once again find porn erotic. Another issue here, Dennis, is that passion and objectivity are inversely related. Generally speaking, the more passionate you are on radio, on TV, and on a live stream, the more engaging you are. But the more passionate you are, the less objective you are. Yes. And when you're objective, it's very hard to be passionate. Any thoughts on that dichotomy, Dennis?
No, it just makes me think it's impossible. I don't know how anybody makes it work, when you put it that way, but it's obviously true. Yeah.
I did a 4-hour stream of just me talking and reading PowerPoints, mostly trying to up the IQ of some of the streamers. I got a few hundred views. I think Gandalf, Church of Entropy, watched it, but I went over the Greeks and communication theory, and some of this with Luke is somewhat like a media professional. He probably took courses, understands the basic of communication theory, message, receiver, medium, but also the Greeks, like what Luke is saying. Unfortunately, you could tell that Luke doesn't really know Aristotle by the way he's describing it, because if he knew, Aristotle, he'd probably, just be saying pathos, ethos, logos, and a lot of this thing, interesting. Probably the alt-right, probably why Luke likes people like, Richard Spencer, because they know quite a bit of this stuff. And objectively, the Greeks and the Romans probably understood rhetoric pretty good, maybe even better to today. And I'm sure in Hollywood, there's a lot of interest in that, where people, do actually study Cicero and Aristotle in the communication theory, let alone the most modern things based on psychology and, actual tests, like talking in the chat, like what could actually be tested. And then also, I think the ancient age might be seen as a little bit more real because it was probably more violent and visceral, and political correctness over the era has stepped in. So when you see like, who really knew how to, control a crowd, and you see, some, God forbid, someone like Hitler or Caesar, as opposed to even Trump or Obama. And you say Trump was an attempt possibly to be like one of these ancient orators. But like even Trump, he's like, nah, I mean, he's a modern invention of the technological Hollywood media era, as opposed to someone like, Caesar, who probably killed thousands of people with his bare hands. I mean, not his bare hands, but I'm saying that he was a real general and warrior. And when he talked about controlling the crowd, it meant something different than when people in university today, and that's probably a good thing. But if you're looking at it, like, God forbid, you can't really study medicine from like Nazi war experiments, but to some extent you could get a better perspective on certain questions from these immoral testings. So in the ancient times where there wasn't so many of these, Trump could have led a rally, it's like Brutus is an honorable man, like Cicero or whatever, the famous speech of Brutus is an honorable man, but saying no. I mean, like Trump, he led an insurrection where he gave a speech and then millions of people died. And so historically you have precedents for orators like that, like in Shakespeare, Henry Agincourt, or these famous representations, you say, or Braveheart or something, that probably doesn't exist in the modern world. And even why you like Luke, you're listening to guys like Eric Stryker, these alt-right guys, and saying these guys appear more real. These guys do actually want to lead an insurrection. These guys are actually talking about real stuff as opposed to all the fake stuff you see in the news and media. And then it's a question about human nature, is how dark is human nature? Is it possible that the Holocaust could happen to good? Again, God forbid, is it possible that the people who are listening to Trump's rally really would have raided the Capitol and killed our leading politicians? So I say historically, it's like, well, there is presidents. People gave a speech, and then a bunch of people ran in and killed people and took over the Congress. And we've never seen anything like that in our lifetime. We only have reading about it to do it. And then if you're like, the SPLC or the ADL, you're scared as crap because you think like, no, those people probably would have killed us if we allowed Trump to just speak how he wanted to. And it's only because we're censoring the speech that the people don't actually do these things. And, censorship is one of the biggest topics we talk about here.
Okay, we've got a article here in Men's Journal. I'll post the link in the chat. Shocker, 20-year study says that marijuana makes you stupid. I got this link from Richard Spencer's Twitter account. He says, I hate pot almost as much as I hate the type of person who smokes pot. And, oh man, they're throwing all these stupid pop-ups at me on Men's Health. I hate that. Okay, marijuana has adopted a relatively harmless reputation in recent years, but a new 20-year study published in the journal Addiction is calling BS. Its authors suggest that marijuana is linked to decreased cognitive function and could potentially lead to a slew of mental disorders. Though the short-term effects of marijuana are not serious, the new study demonstrates that with chronic use, the drug could lead to schizophrenia as well as an increased risk of psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations. The drug has been linked to reduced learning, memory, and attention, and could also be addictive for some people. As if that weren't enough to keep you away, the study also found that after smoking marijuana, you're twice as likely to die from crashing your car. Any thoughts on that, Dooovid?
Yeah, I always agree. Smoking marijuana is not like, I usually, because I speak to mostly Orthodox Jews when I talk about it, or we'll even use the Hebrew words litatchila and b'diavad, which means kind of like best case scenario, and b'diavad is, second case scenario. And that's generally the way the Jewish law describes it, that no one who is doing good in life could ask their rabbi, should I smoke some weed? Any rabbi is going to say no. But if you're like, I'm suffering depression, I have chronic pain, then a rabbi could say it's okay to smoke weed. Like kind of like a pain medication, or due to the situation, you kind of have to have something bad going on to have it okayed. So yeah, I think the evidence is pretty clear that there's negative effects of smoking weed, and that's why it's had historically been a criminalized drug, and even today has all these precautions because it does have these negative effects. But then at the same time, it does have the medicinal and psychological value that makes it so popular.
And we were discussing honor from the Goyim yesterday, and I think you had some additional thoughts on that. Did you want to add anything to our discussion? I was pointing out to you yesterday that there are instances where even Haredi Jews will consider honor from the Goyim a positive thing, such as if they are choosing a doctor or some kind of professional, a legal professional, a dentist, that they would prefer someone who's successful rather than someone who's not successful. And if you're successful, if you're a Jewish billionaire, it's overwhelmingly true that you're going to have some honor from the Goyim. You don't get to make millions and billions of dollars without getting any honor from the Goyim. Any thoughts, Dooovid?
Well, I think it's separate because money is a tangible thing that you're rewarded with, and honor is something intangible that you could even argue is false and doesn't even exist in reality. So you mean honor from the Goyim, my eBay seller rating, my 100% seller rating, all these people who complimented my service, that, I mean, there's probably a few Jews who bought things from me, but I'm saying that most of my customers are probably Gentiles and have given me a good rating. And that might be kind of like honor, but there's something tangible where it's people, that's reputation. These are people saying, I bought the product and he did a good job. I got exactly what I wanted in good condition. It was shipped fastly and securely. Props. You could trust that this seller is going to give you what you want and do his best effort to get it to you as quick as possible in as good a condition as possible, versus like honor and prestige that like the Nobel Prize or something like that, where you say, honestly, I think the Nobel Prize is a scam. I think it's probably generally bad, and it's probably something, nepotism or favoritism, or they're covering up for immorality, even like Harvard, that, God forbid, if someone went to Harvard, I'm more likely to think bad things about them than good things about them, because the honor that the Goyim, so to say, give upon these people is largely negative. They're liked for the wrong reason. And there's a lot of dichotomies you could look at that, like, saying what does it mean to be well respected, and then using money as a heuristic, where you say, well, how much money did you make? I mean, I'm going to judge how respected you are by the Goyim by how much money you made, because because it's a pretty good indicator. How good of a doctor is a person? And you could look, saying like any rabbi would compliment me on my eBay sellers rating. No rabbi is going to say, don't look at the doctor's rating, but is that really part of reputation when you look at their actual rating of their patients when they say how they good they did or not? But if you had to look at a larger picture, that money is probably a better heuristic than what we'll call honor. So to say that this guy, he's really well liked and he's really looked up to upon the people, versus this guy's really got a big bank account. And if you're judging expertise from that, that to some extent, money is a pretty good indicator of expertise. If this guy's saying, oh, I'm such an expert, but I don't have any money, you could within reason say, I doubt it. If you knew what you were talking about, you probably would have figured a way out to make money off of it. So I'm just going to assume that you're not really an expert. And if, it was like Professor Kugel, he was Harvard and hundreds of people listened to him, and, so on, you say, well, he's not a rabbi. It's not respectable for him to be poor. Saying if he was trying to be a Haredi rabbi and demonstrate that he's a man of the people by not becoming wealthy, that'd be one thing. But saying like, no, I mean, he's obviously not going for that venue. So it makes sense to measure him by his money. And I'd even mentioned to Luke, God forbid, I think he was talking about people falling into stripping. And if he wants to read from it, there's a Talmud that talks about, God forbid, this daughter who falls into prostitution because a goy says she's pretty. And because she took to her heart that the goy says she was pretty, instead of saying, that's completely meaningless that this goy thinks I'm pretty, God forbid, she ends up in the brothels. And the message of the Talmud is kind of, there's modern day interpretations of sexism like that like women who think women who are too smart usually end up in brothels. And there's actually a few stories in the Talmud like that, where the Talmud is kind of saying, like, don't think you're so smart. Oh, women who think they're so smart outsmart everybody straight into the brothel, but that also the venue of what is respect by the goyim. Goyim is like, oh, she's so pretty, and or they something value that the Talmud says isn't really valuable. So when you accept what the goyim thought was valuable, God forbid your daughter ends up in San Bernardino Valley, as opposed to if she said, oh my God, these goyim think I'm pretty. That's probably a bad thing. I should probably dress more humble. And even in the Talmud, there's the rabbi who, there's a peeping Tom on the rabbi's daughter. And the rabbi, it's unclear. I mean, if Luke wants to examine these Talmud, that the rabbi, basically like curses his daughter to die in order that his students shouldn't become sexually aroused by looking at her.
And Laponius presents his counter-argument, Dooovid. If you win a lottery, will you be instantly rich? Yes. Is there any means by which one could instantly gain expertise? No. So money alone is not a sufficient measure for greatness. You have
to maintain money. No, I'm saying, I mean, he's largely incorrect, because the amount of people that win the lottery, one thing, most of those people don't do that well long term because they didn't earn the money. And I say this all the time because I'm trying to convince Jennifer to look at money more seriously as an indicator of expertise. But money demands due diligence. So if someone won the lottery and they're not dumb and they plan on keeping the money, they're going to hire a lawyer and an accountant. So if someone, if you win the lottery and someone comes up to you like, oh, you got a bunch of money, let's make a big party in San Bernardino Valley. And the guy's like, great, that sounds awesome. That's what I always wanted to do. Now that I have the money, let's do it. But if he asks his accountant and his lawyer, they're probably going to say no. Bad idea. And so if you have money, you're going to have a lawyer and accountant, and you're probably going to do what the lawyer and accountant tell you. And therefore, money is a pretty good indicator, because people who have bad behavior lose their money. And I've said that even in terms of religiously to Hindus and Jews, that the impulse control that a wealthy person has is actually highly exceeds the impulse control of most rabbis, in the sense that, like if you're in San Bernardino Valley and there's some really, really hot stripper, and, there's a bunch of rabbis' kids and there's a billionaire's kids, that the billionaire has an intuitive understanding that this relationship will negatively affect my ability to maintain my wealth, as opposed to the rabbi's son would have less of ability to look at the situation like, oh man, this is really, I mean, you say, okay, it's going to affect his marriage and his rabbinic career, but there's that pressure of just having money where, I might want to do this. It might feel like it's good for me, but it's going to be bad for my money. And so that's why money is usually such a good indicator of expertise, is because people who don't have expertise can't maintain money.
And Laponius says, can you steal expertise? No, but you can steal money. How someone makes money is relevant. Hiring people doesn't give you expertise. Having money does not give you expertise. Okay, I want to talk about a controversial segment of the Passover Haggadah. The first Passover Seder is Saturday night, March 27th.
Did you have no comment on that yourself, Luke?
I'm sorry?
Did you have any opinion on your own whether how much money is indicative of expertise, or what I'm saying, that the fact is that if you're dumb, that you lose your money. So money maintains some level of a heuristic of a person's expertise or impulse control, because if they didn't have it, they would probably lose their money.
I think it's a rough heuristic. So it doesn't mean that someone necessarily has expertise in a particular area, but it does mean that they have a certain level of cunning or common sense at worst. So if someone's able to hold on to money and build money, sure, they may have stolen it, they may have secured it through immoral or illegal means, but they have a certain level of animal cunning. And all things being equal, I would suspect that they are more adept at certain things with regard to money than the average person. And let me play a little bit here on the Passover Haggadah. Pour out your wrath on the nations. It's one of the most controversial passages in the Passover Haggadah, and for some Jews,
your wrath,
most embarrassing. Oh man, come on.
Pour out your wrath, politically incorrect. One of the most controversial passages in the Passover Haggadah and, for some Jews the most embarrassing, is the call for God to pour out your wrath on the nations that do not acknowledge you, and upon the kingdoms that do not call up your name. This part of the telling of the Exodus story occurs right after the grace after meals and the drinking of the third of 4 cups of wine. We open the door of our homes and call upon God to curse the enemies of the Jewish people, enemies who have devoured Jacob and laid waste his habitation. We then sing for Elijah the prophet to usher in the redemption of the Jewish people. We close the door and the Seder continues. Should this portion of the Haggadah be omitted as the vestige of medieval malevolence on behalf of Jews toward non-Jews? Does this only reflect a reality of centuries ago when Jews were struggling with Jew haters who persecuted them? In an epoch when we hope for a messianic age of universal brotherhood, is not this passage tribal and antisocial? Should God really bring down his anger on all non-Jews for not accepting him as the one true God? In an America, where Jews want to integrate and emphasize what unites all Americans, is not this passage the epitome of political incorrectness? I believe that this passage of pour out your wrath is as relevant today as it was 500 or 1,000 years ago. Today, more than ever, we need the support of God in defeating our enemies. What we are enduring today is the worst anti-Semitism worldwide since World War II and the Shoah. To call for God to pursue our enemies with anger, and destroy them from beneath the heavens of the Lord is more appropriate than ever. The Jewish state faces forces that want to destroy it: Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS and a nuclear Iran. Not only is the state of Israel threatened, but Jews all over the world are vulnerable to attack. In the U.S., young Jews are intimidated on college campuses by faculty and students who hate Israel and create a hostile environment of BDS against the Jewish state. But not only are Jews targeted, but Western civilization is facing threats. This is a time of crisis with real enemies we must face. What better time to call on God to eradicate the enemies of the Jewish people? The Exodus was both an act of fury and an act of compassion. While the 10 plagues were meant to punish the Egyptians for their enslavement of our ancestors, they were also proof of God's power to a slave people who never believed they would be redeemed. God heard the cries of the enslaved and saw their suffering. Out of an act of love and promise he redeemed the lowly people. The angry God who pours out his wrath is a God pursuing justice for his people. God cannot simply be a God of love and compassion. To preserve his chosen people he must engage that people's enemies. There are times to turn the other cheek and forgive, but there are times we must recognize evil and destroy it. It is tragic that only 70 years after Auschwitz there is so much hate of Jews in the world. But the divine response is to pour out anger and destroy those who want to destroy us. Pour out your wrath may embarrass those Jews who want to wallow in victimhood. But for those who want to survive, thrive, and be victorious, it is necessary.
Hey, Dooovid, any thoughts on this passage from the Passover Haggadah? God, we implore God to pour out your wrath on the non-Jewish nations.
Yeah, I think we discussed this in Mark Shapiro. I mean, it's the 11th, the principle of Maimonides, that we believe with perfect faith that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. That, we're not pacifists, we're not Hindus. We believe fundamentally we're required to believe that the wicked get punished. And so one of the things that we request from God is the punishment of the wicked. So that's why I was saying, like we were talking yesterday about Professor Kugel in Jewish studies, where you were saying Jewish studies is kind of like Jewish propaganda, because you're putting down to it is like, aren't you guys a backwards, politically incorrect, false religion? Like, look at you guys, you're backwards people that want to destroy your enemies. Like Adam Green. Adam Green is like, Luke, admit it, you want to kill me. You think that God's going to come and punish me for being evil because that's what your religion said, that's what your books say. And to some extent, you could find those quotes all over our books. So theologically, it makes sense to have a system, from the Maimonidean free will perspective. That's the price of free will, is the punishment of the wicked. That when we were given free will, we have the ability to do good or bad, but the ability for us to do bad necessitates that we suffer the punishment for doing bad. Although, God is bent towards mercy and there's a repentance process, and the proper punishment for our crimes could be reduced. But Passover is coming. It's like a Moloch time. It's like Adam Green. It's crunch time. These are the bad guys. You're a Jew. They're our enemies. Not only they're enemies of humankind and God himself. And, so if you're going to ask like Mark Shapiro or Professor Kugel, to give some sort of modern day rationalist approach, and saying those guys probably wouldn't debate Adam Green. They wouldn't take Adam Green's critique seriously, as opposed to I told Adam Green, like, I don't think he's a Moloch, but like, yes, at the end of the day, when the battle comes, I will be there and I will be on the side of the Jews. And because that's my religion, that's what I believe. And so you say, like, Doovid's a dangerous person. Didn't you hear him? He just said that there's going to be battle at the end of the days, and he's ready for it, and he's going to be on the side of the Jews. So, I mean, it's a question. That's why I said that's why Jewish studies is such a difficult topic. So if you're going to take an unpolitically correct answer, which usually puts Orthodox Jews on the right wing, you say, look, it's a dangerous world. There's really bad people out there. And yes, I do, in fact, pray for the destruction of my enemies. I do, in fact, think that there is a righteous God. And one of the things that the righteous God does is metes out punishment upon the wicked. And so that's why, Professor Kugel, says he's a heretic, like from that perspective, like he's a classic heretic that rejects the 11th principle of Maimonides, that we fundamentally believe that the wicked are going to be punished.
Okay, there's a question from the chat. What do you guys think about Nick Fuentes and the America First movement? So I think it's a nationalist movement, and sometimes it's quite funny. Sometimes it's insightful. Sometimes it's moronic and self-destructive. So to the extent it supported and pushed and encouraged things like the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill, I think that was idiotic. Nick Fuentes advised Republicans not to vote in the Georgia 2 Senate seat runoffs. I thought that was idiotic. Other times, Nick has said things that are pretty sharp and funny. So I don't have any strong opinion one way or another about Nick Fuentes and the America First movement. Sometimes I find that there's like entertainment from that movement. Sometimes I think they've got some good points to make. Other times I think that they're stupid, moronic, and antisocial. Dooovid, do you have any opinions on Nick Fuentes and the America First movement?
Yeah, I like a general meta-analysis of the movement in general. And Nick Fuentes, like, I never tuned into his show. I saw him a few times. I mean, he's a smart guy, intellectual, talented, but it's kind of like Rush Limbaugh, that it's the freshman class again and again, and that you don't really get deep insight into issues from Nick Fuentes. You get kind of a simplified version of talking points that's meant for the masses. And then on a meta-analysis angle, that I would say, when me and Luke first started talking about this, the alt-right after 2016 and Trump elections, when originally there were a ton of Jews in the alt-right, and this question, like, Richard Spencer and his white Zionism, and who becomes white, who is going to be included in white, that at the end of the day, you see two elements. One, like Nick Fuentes, I keep on mentioning, like, Jews, and just the huge amount of Jews with blue eyes. And I think Nick Fuentes, Hispanic blue-eyed man. But generally, factually, Jews in America are pretty white. So if you're going to make white nationalism based on Judaism, based on whiteness, you're going to find that there's probably well over 100,000 Jews that are basically largely Aryan, blonde hair, and blue-eyed looking, not even including half Jews and quarter Jews and things like that. So like among, Hispanics, even like Josh Neal, and Spanish people, Italian people, that objectively in America, Jews are on the whiter end than even most Europeans. So that initially, this what is going to be white and are Jews going to be included, that the nationalistic movement would eventually become big tent, very loosely white centered, where there's a whole bunch of people in it that are partially white. But Jews, even though we're whiter, would sort of be sidelined and pushed out. So that even though they're trying to create a white Zionism, that they overall, the American First movement for white interest probably does better without the 100,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jews, and with the Hispanics that feel like Nick Fuentes in terms of like larger political bloc and organizing. So I would think that the American First movement probably has staying power to become a legitimate Republican movement. And there probably is that element of anti-Semitism, where originally, it was like Jared Taylor. If you have blonde hair and blue eyes, he doesn't care if you're 100% Jew. But the larger alt-right movement is probably going to be Christian, and so that would be a few of the lessons, meta lessons I took from Nick Fuentes.
Okay, great. So Rob Henderson wrote an op-ed in the New York Post. It's titled "Why My College Pals Went to Yale While My High School Friends Went to Jail," and some amazing statistics in this op-ed. 60% of boys in foster care grow up to be jail inmates. 60% of boys in foster care grow up to be jail inmates. For every foster kid who obtains a college degree, 20 are incarcerated. For every foster kid who obtains a college degree, 20 are incarcerated. And then, it's a child born into a poor family is 3 times more likely to get a college degree than a child who has lived in foster care. Wow. All right, I want to play a little excerpt here from Mark Shapiro.
Everyone who knows Herschel Schachter up close speaks about him very kind, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the story? Why am I telling you all this? Because I think it's a very interesting story. I thought it was important to include the letter. He comes, as I said, every 2 months or so. He used to come. Now they do it on Zoom to my town to give these shiurim. So sometimes I go if I'm around. This was in, I think, 4 years ago. So he came. It was before Pesach. He gave a shiur on Pesach. I've mentioned this before. I think it's one thing when he comes in to give a shiur, just to speak about issues. That's fine. I find it strange when they invite him in, ask the rabbi. Because there are local rabbanim, so fine. But if I guess the rabbis will say, well, we're mochel, and you can ask him. But the problem is, the Schachter comes in and he sometimes says things in opposition to what the rabbi said. And at that night, I mentioned this before, he came in and he was asked about using those Listerine strips on Yom Kippur. It wasn't Pesach, but for Yom Kippur. Because you could ask any question. It was because the same thing, I guess it would be Pesach. If it's mutter on Yom Kippur, it's mutter on Pesach also. It's not ochel. And he said it's permitted on Yom Kippur. And it was different than what people in the community had been told. So you always run into these problems. But after the class was over, someone asked me, the person who runs it, organizes it, he asked me, would I drive him back to New York? So it's not far. It's that time of night. You get to Washington Heights, 30 minutes, 35 minutes from West Orange, New Jersey. So I said, fine. Sure, I said, fine. It's a big success here, especially because you can talk for all this time. And when you talk to Rav Shefty, you hear all sorts of interesting things. He tells it like it is. So the few times I'd spoken to him before that. So I said, sure, I'll take him. And I don't use, I'm like the Rav. I don't use this third person. The rabbis in town, they speak to him in third person. Does the Rosh Hashiva say this? It's famous. They once asked the Rav this. Someone asked them, what does the Rosh Hashiva think? And the Rav was like, well, which Rosh Hashiva? And they said, you. I mean, which Rosh Hashiva? No, you. So I said, so why don't you say you? In English, it doesn't work like in German or Yiddish, third person. And when you speak to the president, you speak first person, second person. So it's a bit, I can never get into the third person unless you're trained in a certain yeshiva. But whatever. So I have him in the car. Now, I've been driving for, talking 30, by that time, 35 years or whatever. I've only had one flat tire in my entire life. I've had a number of times that we all had where you come outside and maybe in the morning and you see the tires a little low and you go and there's a nail in it. But actually on the road, it was like when I was 19 in my town, just a mile from my house. I've never had a flat. Lo and behold, I get him in the car and we're going. And right when we get on the highway, 280. 280, if you know West Orange, it's that's the road you'll take then to get to New York City. So literally 3 minutes, 4 minutes from the show, right when you get on 280, lo and behold, a big noise. And this is like 10 o'clock at night now, 10:15 at night. And because we'd have a Myriv after the shiur went to like 9:30 and then we'd have Myriv and then people asking questions. And we didn't get out of there till like 10 or 5 after 10. So maybe 10 after 10 it was. A big noise. And all of a sudden you hear like the wheel going. So I pull to the side and I get out and I'm like, we have a flat. So he says, okay, so we have a flat. So I call the AAA and I get in the car and we're waiting 15, 20 minutes. We're talking. And then I realized that they said it'll be like within an hour, but it's already now like 10:30, 10:40 or something. I'm like thinking this is not such a good idea. So I tell him I'm going to, because I said I don't know by the time they get here, it might be after 11. And I said, I'm going to call my friend, the guy who asked me to drive you and say I have a flat to take you home. And he says, no, I don't want you to do that. I said, why not? He says, because I'm not going to leave you here on the side of the road all by yourself. So we sit for a little while longer, and he has to be up early in the morning. He has to give shiur. So I'm like, no, this is crazy. So I say to him, I'm calling him up. He has to take you. This makes no sense. So we get an argument. He says, no, it's not right. It's not. I can't leave you. I said, no. I said, well, I'm going to go home. They'll bring me. I'm 5 minutes from home once they change the tire. But you're not going to get home. It's not going to be till after midnight. You got to be up early in the morning. You have to do shiur. So I convinced him to. So I got on the phone and I call this guy, and he comes and he picks him up. He gets there like close to 11 or so, or quarter to 11. He picks him up and takes him home. And then the guy AAA came like 11:15, did my tire. I went home. A couple of weeks after that, I told him about the things I'm writing in the historian blog. So I sent him something I wrote, and he writes back to me. Kavod Yakiri. He says, the first thing he says, Asir Todani Lachem, I am very thankful to you that you volunteered to bring me to New York. Umitzta'er ani al sha'azavti otcha b'emtza derech. This is 2 weeks later. He says, I'm sorry. He's still feeling sorry that I left you in the middle of the road. Uve'emet lo haya zemin animus. That was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. In other words, it wasn't respectful. I think that's an incredible thing. I think Rav Schechter probably wouldn't want that included here because, but I think it's important for the people to see that this is a Gadol B'Yisrael who has so much on his mind. People are calling him day and night. He's giving shiurim day and night. And 2 weeks later, the first thing he's saying is, I had to force him to get in the car, basically, is that it still was bothering him and that he's upset that he left me on the road. And I think that says something about his sitkus. Because I know.
Okay, Dooovid, you had a reaction to this story.
Yeah, I even put it on the video, and I like Mark Shapiro, and I mean Rabbi Schechter. I mean, I think he's basically the successor of Reb Soloveitchik. I think he was actually the signatory on the conversion of Ivanka Trump, and he's basically saying, like, praise of, like what I was saying about being a nice guy. That Reb Schechter, not only he's like the greatest rabbi, he's a pretty nice guy. He even made the point of not wanting to abandon me, and this and that, which is I've heard a lot of these statements. And, I like Mark Shapiro. That's why I listened to him. Thanks to Luke for mentioning to me. But there was something else kind of like glaring that I thought, me and Luke could maybe laugh about. And I have a ton of experience and kind of related to my half Jew comment is Luke, have you ever changed a flat tire?
No.
Okay. I've changed like 50 flat tires. And I was thinking about that, like just from listening to the story, not to insult Mark Shapiro, but like from, maybe he's a Jew and he looks at it like, if it's kind of like a Jewish stereotype, it's like, you can't change your own flat tire. It's like, I've had flat tires. I get out and I change them, like that's what people do. It's like Mark Shapiro, he has to call somebody. He needs AAA. He's completely incapable of getting out of his car and changing his own flat tire. And it's not surprising to me. And I was even mentioning to Luke when I messaged the video, was that I used to do these type things, and I speak decent Yiddish, not great Yiddish. I mean, you could hear if I spoke in Yiddish that I wasn't a natural speaker. And the Hasidim would say, Zain Tati's a goy. They didn't call me a half Jew. They would just say, like, in Yiddish, Zain Tati's a goy. His father's not Jewish. And that was like the explanation for why I knew how to change a tire. So Luke could be saying that's not indicative of Jewish culture. That's just a subsect of, fanatic people, Hasidim that speak Yiddish. And it's not necessarily indicative of Jewish culture, but it's in our literature. The Sephardim less so. Local Bukharian Chabad rabbi, jokes about Rashi. Rashi says that you could collect charity to pay for your servant, because Rashi in Europe is that like, of course, like, you're a Jew, you can't do this work yourself as a Jew. You are allowed to collect money to hire a goy to do this manual labor. And Rashi even says it like straight up, like, that's the way it is. You're a Jew, you're not meant to do this labor. You could even beg money to hire a goy to do that labor. And you could say, oh, is that an anti-Semitic canard? Is that a pro-Philo-Semitic canard? And so, like, I'm a Jew on management. I'm sorry. Like, I have self-respect. But, just from that angle, and I don't think Mark Shapiro was mentioning that, but I thought it was kind of funny. Like, he doesn't even, like, apologize for not being able to change his own tire. Like, if it was Luke, I don't know, if you were telling the story, would you, like, apologize and be like you were never really with it? I mean, it was your dad. Maybe as a cleric, he couldn't change his own flat tire. But I'm assuming in the chat, like, your average goy changes their own flat tire. And Mark Shapiro telling the story, the biggest question is like, dude, you really can't change your own flat tire?
So my father taught me how to change a flat tire, and my father changed many a flat tire. So I was taught, but I'm just not interested in doing it. I mean, I don't think I've ever been asked to do it. I would call someone. So I successfully converted to Judaism.
If you were with a bunch of Jews, let's say you were with your guys in synagogue, like 3 or 4 of you in a car, and the tire went out, you're telling me they wouldn't all look at you, the convert, like, maybe he'll change it. Like, they'd look around, or maybe you're kind of like with the Jews. Like, they're in Brooklyn, there's Chaverim. Here in Detroit, there's Chaverim. They change tires. And I actually had Chaverim here at my house because my bolt was frozen. But I mean, he doesn't even mention that. Like, he got out and tried to change it, but the bolt was locked and he had to call AAA. And so they're definitely Orthodox Jews that run garages and know how to do it. But I said, like, no, I would think that even in modern day LA, that if Luke was in a car with an Orthodox Jew and the tire broke down, he would probably look to Luke like, you know how to change this, right?
Not if they know me. I mean, I'm
only because they know you, but
I'm a Luftmensch.
So I was like that among Hasidim, like, saying they just looked at me like, oh, he's the half Jew. Maybe he knows how to do this. And they were right, because I didn't know how to do a lot of this stuff that, even construction, like, using some power equipment and, computers and a lot of basic things that if you had a complete Hasidic education, like I was joking with, Jehuda Maccabee, who I guess isn't streaming recently, but I've been talking with him offline, and saying he's pretty handy with certain things, but saying I was useful among Hasidim in Brooklyn because I knew how to drive, and among the Hasidim in Brooklyn, like most of them didn't even have driver's license. Just driving a car was somewhat an anomaly. Maybe it's still the same now, and even from a religious point of view, that a lot of those people, they didn't want their kids driving. They thought, God forbid, talking about Jewish studies or something, like you're going to drive a car, and next thing you know, you're going to be going to the strip club. You're going to not want to be, Jew. You're going to be caught up in sin. And the reason why, because it was an honor to drive rabbis. And honestly, like a lot of people in the Orthodox world were probably like a little, jealous of me, even though I had to, I was driving rabbis. But like, I was there, and like, I know what they said. They said, like, they said right in front of me, like, Sein Tati's a goy, and that was the explanation for why I was the driver, and it made sense to them, and it made sense to me because I was in their education system, and I saw that they didn't teach their kids how to do this stuff, and they had probably pretty good reasons why they didn't teach their kids to do this stuff, but because like I'm a half Jew, I knew how to do all these things, so it was actually quite logical to me. And so was that anti-Semitic canard, is that really representative of what Judaism is?
Do you know how to fish and how to gut a fish?
Yeah, I could probably. I could probably do that also. Like my grandmother did that. Like when I was a kid, my grandfather, like we shot a deer. Like I remember. In fact, I even have the antlers of the deer in my basement still. But like he. Put it in the bathtub and bled it, and then we ate it, and we fished. Like I've done that. Like I'm not. I'm not a gun owner or a gun fanatic, but like I fired a gun when I was a kid, and a whole bunch of these things that are, I've been skiing that are pretty typical that like most goyim have done. But if you're in an ultra orthodox world, it's looked at as a goyish thing. Like we're Jews, we don't do this stuff. The reason that you've done this and we haven't done it is because your fathers are not Jewish.
Okay, great. Dooovid, any final words before I move on?
Yeah, I'm enjoying this, and I'm glad you got Dennis back, and hopefully you could maintain your friends. And it's tough to have the streaming where it's like, I just want to have friends and talk to my friends, but at the same time, I'm trying to grow, and you got to make sure people are doing things according to standards. And not just the YouTube, but that's going to make the show popular and grow. And it's probably near impossible. So it's largely a thankless task. I mean, maybe you have some things for doing it, but I respect that you're streaming and talking to the people day after day, and glad to be a part of it. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dooovid. Good to talk to you. Okay, let's learn how to build ourselves up without limits.
So it's the same